The movie begins on Valentine's Day, where an engaged couple, Patrick and Adeline, decide to celebrate the occasion at a beautiful countryside farm. Patrick takes advantage of the romantic moment and offers his fiancée a strawberry. As soon as she takes a bite, she discovers an engagement ring hidden inside. Even though she nearly breaks a tooth, she immediately realizes what he's about to do and lets him continue. Patrick gets down on one knee and proposes to Adeline, and she happily says yes. The romantic moment continues. Suddenly, Patrick's phone rings. It's the photographer he hired to capture the proposal. The photographer is hiding across the road with his camera, but he got distracted and asks Patrick to repeat the proposal so he can get a better shot. Annoyed, Patrick warns him not to mess up again, or he won't get paid. The photographer resumes filming, but out of nowhere, a mysterious man appears and drives a meat cleaver straight through the camera lens, causing it to pierce the photographer's eye. Meanwhile, Patrick and Adeline begin reenacting the proposal, but the photographer calls them again. This time, Adeline answers the phone, only to watch Patrick get struck in the head by an arrow. Terrified, Adeline runs toward the car, but the attacker fires more arrows at her, forcing her to flee into a nearby field. As she runs, she trips and falls, allowing the killer to shoot her in the leg. Despite her injury, she manages to reach a storage warehouse, where she warns a security guard that someone is chasing her. Just as she feared, the killer appears again. He throws a knife that strikes the guard in the eye, then grabs his cleaver and begins searching for Adeline, who hides inside a large metal container. She struggles to remain completely silent, and after a few tense moments, everything goes quiet. She assumes the killer has given up and left. Unfortunately, the container she's hiding in is actually an industrial compactor. The masked killer switches it on, and the crushing machine slowly begins to close. Adeline screams for help, but no one hears her, and she is brutally crushed to death. The mysterious man then stares at what remains of his victim while wearing a mask with heart-shaped lenses. News of Adeline's horrific death spreads rapidly across the media, but investigators soon realize this isn't an isolated incident. It's another murder committed by a notorious serial killer known as Heart Eyes. Similar murders have taken place in random cities across the United States, and every victim has been a couple celebrating Valentine's Day. The story then shifts to Seattle, where a jewelry designer named Ally is chatting with her best friend, Monica. Ally is upset after seeing her ex-boyfriend happily involved in a new relationship. Things get even worse when her boss urgently calls her into a meeting. At the office, Ally meets Jay, a talented designer who has recently arrived in Seattle to work with the company. The two quickly realize they have a lot in common and begin talking. During their conversation, a small metal ornament falls to the floor. Both of them bend down to pick it up, but Ally stands up too quickly and accidentally smashes her head into Jay's nose. Embarrassed by the awkward accident, she hurriedly hands him a few tissues to stop the bleeding before rushing away with Monica. Later, everyone gathers with their manager, Crystal, to discuss the company's upcoming Valentine's Day marketing campaign. With the Heart Eyes murders dominating the news, Crystal orders her team to come up with a successful campaign as quickly as possible. Ally is the first to present her idea, but her promotional video focuses on tragic couples during Valentine's Day, leaving everyone unimpressed. She fears she's about to be fired, but instead, Crystal assigns the company's newest employee to help her improve the campaign. That employee turns out to be Jay, the same designer whose nose she broke in the cafeteria. Elsewhere, detectives Hobbs and Shaw begin investigating Adeline's murder. Although they have very little evidence, one detective discovers an engagement ring inside the warehouse, leading her to suspect that the infamous Heart Eyes killer is responsible. Her theory is confirmed when she finds the last photograph taken by the murdered photographer, revealing the masked serial killer lurking in the background. Back in Seattle, Jay invites Ally out to dinner because he wants to get to know his new coworker better. Ally agrees, but she makes it clear that this is strictly a business dinner, not a date. That evening, she meets Jay at the restaurant. Although she tries to keep things professional, she can't completely hide her growing interest in him. Jay seems to feel the same way and tries to learn more about her, but Ally insists they stay focused on work. Jay agrees, but he asks if something happened in her past because the video she created reflects a deep disappointment with love. Ally eventually admits that her past relationships left her heartbroken, causing her to lose faith in romance altogether. She no longer believes true love exists. Her cynical outlook surprises, and even disappoints, Jay. However, Ally immediately becomes defensive, telling him he has no right to judge her simply because she sees life differently. At that point, Jay realizes the atmosphere has become uncomfortable, and the conversation grows noticeably tense. Jay decides not to continue the conversation and leaves, telling Ally that he'll think of a new idea for the marketing campaign. Feeling guilty, Ally immediately runs after him and, in a completely unexpected move, kisses him on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. By pure coincidence, her ex-fiancé and his new girlfriend walk up at that exact moment, having come to the same restaurant to celebrate Valentine's Day. It's obvious that Ally only did it to make her ex jealous. After the awkward encounter, Ally and Jay quickly hail a taxi and head back home. When they arrive at Ally's apartment, she realizes she left her keys at work. Jay offers to help by breaking the glass in the door so she can get inside, but he cuts his hand in the process. Ally invites him into the apartment and asks him to wait while she grabs the first aid kit. As she treats his wound, she admits that before becoming a jewelry designer, she had dreamed of becoming a doctor, but she couldn't handle the sight of blood. Their conversation continues until Ally walks over to the closet to grab something. To her horror, she discovers the heart-eyes killer hiding inside. He violently kicks her onto the bed and raises his crossbow to fire an arrow at her, but she narrowly escapes. Jay rushes in to protect her and shoves the killer into the closet. Despite putting up a strong fight, the masked murderer lands a powerful punch that sends Jay crashing into the wall before wrapping his hands around his neck and choking him. Just as the killer pulls out a knife and prepares to finish him off, Ally saves Jay by smashing a vase over the attacker's head. The two sprint toward the front door, and Ally uses Jay's belt to tie the doorknob shut, hoping to trap the killer inside. However, the murderer drives his knife through the door, breaks his way out, and forces them to flee the apartment toward the taxi that is still waiting outside. Unfortunately, the heart-eyes killer catches up to them and shoots the taxi driver in the head with an arrow, killing him instantly. Ally desperately tells the killer that she and Jay aren't engaged and that there's no reason to target them, but the mysterious murderer ignores her and continues the relentless chase. The pair escape into a botanical garden and try hiding inside one of the walkways, but the killer suddenly appears and attacks Ally. Jay grabs the base of a nearby statue and swings it at the attacker, but the killer knocks him to the ground with a brutal kick, leaving him unconscious. With no time to help him, Ally runs into the amusement park section of the garden and hides inside an abandoned carousel. The killer powers up the ride, and the flashing lights immediately reveal her hiding place. He pulls out his knife and charges at her, but Ally dodges the attack, kicks him away, and escapes deeper into the park. Heart Eyes continues pursuing her until a police cruiser arrives, forcing him to flee the scene. A few minutes later, detectives Hobbs and Shaw arrive to investigate. Ally asks about Jay, and fortunately, he's still alive. However, the police arrest him after discovering the Heart Eyes mask and crossbow beside him. Ally tries to explain that Jay wasn't the one who attacked her, but no one believes her, and he's taken to the police station. There, Detective Hobbs begins interrogating him and presents the engagement ring recovered from the crime scene. The ring is engraved with the initials GS, the same initials as Jay Simmons, leading Hobbs to suspect that Jay is either the Heart Eyes killer or his accomplice. Jay denies that the ring belongs to him and points out that even if it did, no experienced serial killer would leave such obvious evidence behind at a murder scene. His sarcastic response only angers Hobbs further, so Detective Shaw steps in, calms her partner down, and asks him to leave the interrogation room for a while. Shaw continues questioning Jay and tells him that he should cooperate because the evidence makes him the prime suspect. She also reveals that he recently traveled to Boston and Philadelphia, and by coincidence, couples were murdered in both cities during the same time he was there. Meanwhile, Ally arrives at the police station and tells the officer at the front desk that Jay is innocent. At that moment, the IT technician finishes working on the officer's computer, and the officer steps away to check whether Shaw has finished questioning Jay. Left alone in the station, Ally suddenly hears what sounds like Jay's voice coming from another room. Believing the Heart Eyes killer might be hiding there, she grabs a metal pipe to defend herself. Just then, Detective Shaw walks in and asks what she's doing. Ally quickly changes the subject and pleads with Shaw to release Jay because he's not the murderer. Shaw remains unconvinced and asks why Heart Eyes targeted them in the first place if they weren't actually engaged. Ally finally admits that she kissed Jay in front of her ex-fiancé and pretended they were engaged just to make him jealous. She believes the killer may have mistaken them for a real couple because of that. Before she can explain anything else, the lights throughout the police station suddenly go out. Shaw rushes to the interrogation room to check on Jay and orders one of the officers to restore the power at the electrical panel. The officer grabs a flashlight from the same room where Ally thought she had heard Jay's voice. Ally insists there's no danger, but the Heart Eyes killer suddenly appears behind the officer and strikes her from behind with the metal pipe. Panicked, Ally grabs the flashlight, but it immediately goes out, leaving her alone with the killer in complete darkness. Fortunately for him, the heart-shaped lenses on his mask allow him to see perfectly in the dark, and he begins hunting her through the station. Thinking quickly, Ally slams a large barrel into him, knocking him to the floor before escaping through the hallways. She eventually runs into Detective Shaw, who immediately opens fire the moment she sees the masked killer. Hearing the gunshots, Hobbs rushes in to help his partner but can't find her anywhere. As he searches the corridors, he reaches the end of one hallway, where Heart Eyes suddenly ambushes him with a meat cleaver. The first blow leaves Hobbs screaming in agony, and before he can fight back, the killer buries the cleaver into his neck, making him his next victim. Meanwhile, Ally continues running until she reaches another room, where she spots Jay through the interrogation room window. She calls out to him, and he tells her to grab the handcuff keys from Detective Hobbs' body. Before she can free him, however, Heart Eyes storms into the room carrying an axe. Jay shoves a chair at the killer in an attempt to escape, but the handcuffs keep him trapped, making him the attacker's next target. While the killer is distracted chasing him, Ally manages to grab the handcuff keys, unlock Jay, and the two race toward the exit together. Once they reach the road, Ally spots a passing delivery truck and desperately waves for help, but the driver keeps going. At the very last second, Jay throws himself at her, pushing her out of harm's way and saving her life. Deeply moved by his selfless act, Ally looks into his eyes, and the two find themselves just moments away from sharing a kiss. Just as Ally and Jay are about to kiss, the Heart Eyes killer suddenly appears again, ruining the moment. They quickly hide inside a parked van, where they watch the killer walk right past the vehicle. Fortunately, he doesn't notice them and continues searching elsewhere. While they're hiding, Ally takes the opportunity to apologize for leaving Jay alone with Heart Eyes back at the botanical garden. She also admits that she's been searching for true love because that's what she witnessed growing up. Her parents truly loved each other and were completely devoted to one another, but after her father passed away, her mother was never able to recover from the loss, and their family completely fell apart. Jay tells her that his childhood was the exact opposite. His parents constantly argued until they eventually got divorced, making them the perfect example of a failed relationship. Instead of giving up on love, however, their marriage inspired him to prove that real love does exist. Ever since then, he's been searching for the right person to build a lasting relationship with. The heartfelt conversation brings them even closer, but they're suddenly interrupted by another engaged couple inside the van, who are too caught up in their own romantic moment to notice anyone else. Ally and Jay quietly beg them to keep their voices down because they might attract Heart Eyes, but the couple ignores their warning. Just as Ally feared, the killer suddenly appears and drives a lug wrench into the man's neck before murdering his fiancée the same way. A nearby woman witnesses the horrific attack and screams in terror, alerting everyone at the drive-in theater. Panic immediately spreads through the crowd as people begin running for their lives, while Heart Eyes starts slaughtering anyone who gets in his way. Jay tells Ally they need to escape, but she insists on stopping the killer before he can claim any more innocent lives. Although he doesn't agree with her plan, he decides to help anyway. The problem is that they don't have any weapons. The only thing they can use is the lug wrench still lodged in the dead man's neck. Despite being disgusted by the blood, Ally pulls it out just in time, allowing them to defend themselves as Heart Eyes swings his meat cleaver at them. They race toward the giant drive-in movie screen, and when the killer catches up, Jay attacks him with the lug wrench. Heart Eyes easily disarms him and punches him square in the nose. Already bleeding and exhausted, Jay is no match for the killer, giving the murderer the perfect chance to deliver the final blow. Before he can finish Jay off, Ally spots a cooler inside one of the parked cars and smashes it over the killer's head, knocking the meat cleaver out of his hand. Although the blow briefly stuns him, he quickly recovers and begins choking Ally. Without wasting a second, Jay grabs a knife and stabs Heart Eyes in the body. The killer collapses to the ground, seemingly dead, but blood splatters all over Ally, making her feel dizzy. Once she regains her composure, she removes the killer's mask to reveal his face, but neither of them recognizes him. Hours later, ambulances arrive to treat the injured while Ally and Jay sit safely inside one of the cars. Believing the nightmare is finally over, Jay invites Ally to finish their date since he'll soon be leaving for another city. However, Ally thinks it's best if she simply goes home. At that moment, Detective Shaw appears with an injured arm from the earlier attack. Now that the case appears to be solved, she offers Jay a ride back to his hotel. Before leaving, Jay gives Ally his phone number and tells her to call if she changes her mind. Back at her apartment, Ally tries to put the horrifying night behind her, but she can't stop thinking about Jay. Moments later, Monica calls after reading about everything in the newspaper and asks if she's okay. Ally assures her she's fine but admits that she feels like she let her chance at finding lasting love slip away. Monica encourages her to go after Jay, reminding her that it's never too late to move on from the past and give herself another chance at love. Feeling inspired, Ally rushes to the airport to find him. Spotting a man from behind who looks just like Jay, she hugs him without hesitation, only to realize he's a complete stranger. Embarrassed, she quickly apologizes. Just then, her phone rings from an unknown number. When she answers, a mysterious voice tells her that Jay has been captured. If she wants him to stay alive, she must come alone to the church, or she'll never see him again. Ally follows the instructions and arrives at the church, where she finds Jay injured and tied up. Standing behind him is Hard Eyes. When the killer removes his mask, the shocking truth is revealed. He's actually the IT technician from the police station, whose real name is David. The surprises don't end there. David's wife is also dressed as Hard Eyes, and she's revealed to be Detective Shaw. They also explain that they had a third accomplice named Eli, who was obsessively infatuated with Shaw and helped them carry out the murders. However, he eventually became more of a liability than an asset, which is why Ally and Jay unknowingly killed him earlier at the drive-in theater. Shocked by the revelation, Ally asks why they murdered so many innocent engaged couples. Shaw calmly replies that it was simply a romantic hobby she shared with her husband. The couple then reveals that their original targets that night were Ally's ex-fiancé and his new girlfriend. They planned to kill them after they left the restaurant, but after seeing Ally with Jay, they changed their minds and made the two of them their new targets instead. After explaining everything, Shaw points to a handgun resting on a nearby couch and gives Ally one final choice. She can either shoot Jay, and she and David will let her go free, or she can shoot herself to save the man she loves. Ally picks up the gun and finally admits that she truly loves Jay. She raises the weapon toward herself as if she's about to pull the trigger. At the very last second, however, she spins the gun and fires into Jay's shoulder. The bullet passes through him and strikes Shaw in the stomach. Ally immediately grabs Jay and tries to escape, but David and Shaw quickly catch them. Shaw attacks Ally while David drags Jay away and raises his meat cleaver, preparing to execute him. Without David noticing, Jay grabs one of the crossbow bolts and drives it straight into David's face, piercing his eye and nose. David screams in agony, and when Shaw sees what happened, she flies into a rage and punches Ally hard enough to break her nose. Shaw then picks up her husband's meat cleaver and prepares to kill Ally, but Ally remembers the small metal ornament she's been carrying in her pocket. She uses it to slash Shaw across the neck. With one final burst of strength, Ally shoves Shaw into a statue inside the church, forcing her neck onto the statue's sword. The blade cleanly decapitates her. Even with blood covering the room, Ally is no longer afraid. She rushes over to help Jay, but David suddenly reappears, crawling toward them across the floor. Jay grabs the crossbow, fires one final bolt directly into David's head, and kills the Hard Eyes killer once and for all. 1 year later, Ally and Jay return to the jewelry company to celebrate the incredible success of the marketing campaign they created together. At the same time, Ally leaves her job to pursue her lifelong dream of becoming a doctor. Later, the couple returns to the drive-in theater for a romantic date, the very same place where one of the fake Hard Eyes killers was killed. Just before the movie starts, Jay surprises Ally. Instead of giving her an engagement ring, he hands her the key to his apartment because he knows she's still hesitant about marriage, inviting her to move in with him instead. But Ally has finally overcome her fears. She pulls out an engagement ring of her own and proposes to Jay. Without a second of hesitation, he happily accepts, and the two spend the rest of the evening together, excited to begin their future as husband and wife. And that's the end of the movie. Thanks for watching. Don't forget that your opinion matters to us, so be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel.